The Remarkable People Podcast. Check it out. The Remarkable People Podcast. Listen, do, repeat. For life.
Hello, friends. Welcome to this week's remarkable episode of the Remarkable People Podcast, the Lisa Foster story. This week, I am excited. First thing is I had COVID, so I wanted to apologize to you for having to skip a couple weeks of the podcast. Now, if you're binge listening or just tuning in maybe weeks ago or weeks in the future, you don't know what I'm talking about. But if you're a regular listener waiting for the weekly episode, my apologies. I have had COVID, which isn't the end of the world, but I felt like trash. I was very tired. Thank the Lord for his healing, a strong body, ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, and time. Now I'm better and ready to go. So in this episode, we have Lisa. Lisa has been great to communicate with, super flexible, patient. She's a girl you're going to hear about that is from Jewish origin, growing up in Utah, has the Holocaust directly in her family's history, learned a ton about life. And even though, like us, she had struggles, she shows us how she overcame those struggles. She was super introverted, for instance, and she didn't want to share and communicate. And now she learned how to communicate. She took how she wasn't even a good student, didn't care about school, but she had a passion for learning and reading, ends up going to the college of her dreams, which you'll learn about. She led California. It was warm. It wasn't cold. So she ends up going to one of the two schools she heard about. And then how she gets her degree, becomes an English teacher, goes on a journey with her husband to Australia to film a movie he was making, and her whole mind was changed with a narrative, with a question, with a small part of a bigger story. So Lisa's journey is truly remarkable. You're going to hear how she raised an $8 million a year company from nothing, and all sorts of life advice. We go deep, we go wide, we go everywhere in between in this journey. You're really going to like this episode. So get your pen and paper, stick around to the end because Lisa is going to give you a special offer. And then when it's all said and done, if we apply what we're learning, we're just going to be better people and help the world be a better place. So I'm David Pasqualone. Welcome to this week's episode, The Lisa Foster Story. Enjoy. Hey, Lisa, how are you today?
Very good. How are you, David?
I am so much better. I was just telling the listeners a little bit about you, what they're here for today, a little bit about COVID and how we had so many obstacles to get to this interview. So I am super pumped to talk with you and for you to share your remarkable story. So you ready to go?
I'm ready to go. Thanks.
All right, awesome. So our listeners know, but if you're new to the show, this is how it works. Lisa's going to take some time and share with us her life story in chronological order from birth to today. She's going to go through the highs, the lows, the pretty, the ugly, and the pretty ugly, right? But she's also going to, yeah, she's also going to share with us the practical steps she took to overcome and achieve so you can too. So Lisa is sharing her time with us graciously so you and I can grow. And then we're going to get to the other part of the show. Where's Lisa today? And then Lisa's going to explain to us where she's today and where she's heading so you and I can help her. So everybody helps each other. So that's what it's all about. So Lisa, at this time, I'm going to mute my mic. Please take us through your remarkable story.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to start at the beginning. So I was born in Salt Lake City, Utah. I am a nice Jewish girl from Salt Lake City, which is sometimes a conversation stopper. No one really knows what to say to that. Actually, there were a lot of Jews in Utah at the time when my great grandparents came to Utah in the late 1800s, when Utah applied for statehood in the 1850s, there was religious affiliation from most states. The separation of church and state was only at the federal level. And Utah kind of knew it was not going to be favorable to apply as a Mormon state. So they declared themselves a land of religious freedom. And people who were fleeing the religious persecution of the pogroms, like my great grandparents in the late 1800s, said, I'm going to the land of religious freedom, Utah. And that's how they ended up there. My grandmother and my grandfather were both born there. So on my dad's side, I'm a third generation Utahn. And my mom actually is a Holocaust survivor. My mom passed away about 5 years ago. She was born in Warsaw, Poland, to Jewish parents there. And her father was in the army. The Polish army was defeated in a few days. They were really technologically outmaneuvered by the Nazis, who were really superior. They had air power and tanks, which the Poles didn't. So she lost her dad really early.
Just to clarify, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
No, I was just saying, just to clarify, they weren't superior as a nation. They were superior in technology. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. No, they had their army had superior firepower.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to make sure it's clear, because you absolutely are representing your history and your people. And if there's anyone who has bias listening, bias is wrong. There's one race, the human race, but we have a real history, and that's what Lisa's talking about. And I just want to make sure nobody's sitting there with a biased bigotry in their head. Nobody is superior than anybody else. But at that time, the technology was like sticks to tanks. So it was a huge, huge margin of difference.
That's correct. And thank you for that clarification. You're 100% right. Morally, they were not superior. Personally, they were not superior. It's just their technology.
Yeah, I didn't want to cut you off. I knew what you meant, but if there's one person listening in over 90 countries that listen to our podcast, I just want to make that crystal clear. Polish, German, Italian, American, any country you're from, one race, the human race, nobody's superior despite what the government tells you.
And any religion. There's no superiority there. All religions are equal. We all have that spiritual center. All right, I'll keep going. And then, so my mother's mother saw that her chances of survival were diminishing. And when my mom was age 4, she gave her up to a Catholic family who really, at risk of their own life, took her in as their own child and raised her. My mother's mother was killed in the Warsaw Uprising within months of her giving her up. And it was a really courageous act. I sometimes, when I had a 4-year-old, I have 2 kids myself, and when I had a 4-year-old, thinking, how could I give this child up to somebody? Would I have had that strength? So that was like a real model of strength to be able to do that. And we're really lucky because my mom did survive. And after the war, her mother's brother was living in the US, found that she had survived and brought her to the US. And she came to Denver, and so that, and my parents met. And so that's where my parents come from. So I have a lot of strength from who my parents are, my mom as a survivor, and my dad as, a small businessman from Utah, generations back. And just a sense of, how business is done, how families stick together, and a sense of survival were all skills that I have drawn on my whole life in business and in my life. So I'm really grateful for the gifts given from my parents.
So Lisa, let's stop there for a second and make that a talking point. I grew up American outside of Boston, but I was first generation for the majority of my family. when we grew up, that bond, that knit, that family, that, whatever happens inside the doors is different than what happens outside of the doors. And you were alluding to that and mentioning that. What was the mindset after people have been such horrific persecution, and they've been absolutely without provocation or doing anything wrong? Your grandmother had to give up her own child to keep your family going. But then how that came to America, what was that like? Like, what was inbred in you from the beginning, instilled in you about family and closeness?
It's a really interesting question. As a Holocaust survivor, she had been through so much. Really, she grew up on the front lines of a war, right? With people shooting it. She just watched people be shot in the street. And that creates a lot of trauma. By the time, my mom is quite remarkable herself. She, at age 4, she's given up. At age 11, the war is over, and she goes to Denver, Colorado. She was bright. Actually, the guy who took her in was an engineering fellow student of her father. And when they were in bunkers all those years for days and months on end in shelters, he had a little girl there who was kind of smart, and he taught her math. So they found out when she got here, she was far ahead of her peers in math. Now, of course, she didn't know any English. She flunked English, but she was way ahead in math. And she actually got into college imagine coming here at 11, you don't know anything. And 7 years later, you're in college, right? And that's where she met my dad, and she never graduated. She met my dad, got married, and went and had kids. But she had so much trauma, she really locked it down. So we never talked about it. It was never talked about. And actually, like, even the Vietnam War, which was going on at that point, was never talked about in my house. And I look back and I think, my dad was protecting my mom. Those images that played out on a lot of people's television sets in their living room, which affected everybody, was never on in our living room ever. Because I think she just had too much trauma to really go into that, to be watching that again so soon. So there was a lot that was not said in my household.
But how did they interact like that? Like right there, the loyalty and the dedication and the love. Your father's like, I'm going to protect my wife, and we're just not even going to have images of this kind of hate in our home. So what kind of what did you pick up that you've carried through to today from that type of family-oriented, family support upbringing?
Well, I guess I should step ahead a few years and just say my parents did get divorced. So he was very protective of her on the one hand, but on the other hand, there was definitely tension and mistrust and difficulty. And I think, not talking about things, that silence and locking things down, one of the lessons that I've learned, and it took me a long time to learn it, is that, when you don't talk about things, what you do is you add shame to whatever is happening. And when you start talking about things, you unwind that shame. Shame, it really is that thing of the things we don't talk about, the feeling of it's just too shameful to talk about. And that in itself is really damaging. And I've learned that when you talk about even the problems, the violence, the issues of the day, whatever they are, being able to be open about things and to communicate about things is so useful in okay, and being able to learn how to feel okay. It's when you say a topic is taboo that I find it very damaging. I think we should just talk about it.
So do you find yourself today, like your default state, is it to openly share and walk through things, or is it to keep it to yourself and you have to force yourself to communicate?
I'm a lot better. I'm really, I mean, I'm fortunate. My husband is so good at just being open and communicating. When I first met him, we just fell in love, but he was like, he would talk about things. I'd be like, really? You just talk about everything? How is that possible? But we've been together for a long time, and I've learned, it's just such a better way to go through life. You just don't, there's so much psychic energy in pulling things back that you don't want to talk about, and just being free and being honest and being authentic and saying, yeah, that's how I feel, is just a real gift. And so I don't hold back anymore. I'm pretty on board with being, I am who I am. My experiences are what they are, and that's made me who I am.
Amen. All right. So if I'm hearing you correctly, by communicating and by sharing your feelings and by being real, you found freedom. You don't have to feel ashamed anymore, and you
Yeah.
let things go and move on. Is that correct?
Yeah. But that was not how I was born. That was not our household. So, my dad was protecting my mom by not having those images on TV. But in my house, emotions were a bad thing. If you got emotional, I would be told, you're getting emotional, go to your room. So if I got excited about something, I could be sent to my room. If I got angry, I had 2 siblings, we got angry or we were fighting over something, we got sent to our room. And we learned to lock down our emotions pretty tight, because you just got sent to your room a lot. And I'm an emotional person, so I was really pretty silent for a long time. I didn't talk about anything a lot as a kid. And there wasn't a lot of encouragement. It was a really loving household. I knew I was very loved. I didn't hurt for anything. We had what we needed. We were sent to a good school, but no one ever asked, did you do your homework? If we got an A on a report card, we got $1, but that was about it. That was the only real talk about school. We weren't asked, what did you learn today at school? What are you learning? If I did well or if I didn't do well, it really didn't matter. I actually flunked science in 6th grade, like an F on the report card. My parents had gotten divorced. I got to a new school. They wanted me to do a report. I had no skills to do that report from where I was coming from. And I just didn't do it. And the teacher said, well, Lisa, I'll help you do it, and I'll help you through that. And I thought to myself, sitting with some strange science teacher getting through, like, that was not, he said, if you don't, I'll have to flunk you. I said, I'll take the F. That sounds great. So, and when the F arrived in my, I knew it was there in the envelope at home, and I knew my mom saw it, and I knew my dad saw it, and no one ever said anything.
Yeah.
Not a word. And then I actually had some issues the next semester and flunked history. And so the message that I took home, that I took away from that experience, was like, well, grades don't matter. They don't ask you about your homework. They don't ask you about school. They don't really expect much of you. And that's another lesson that I've really, really learned, is how damaging it is to have low expectations. Because when people don't expect you to do much, it's really hard to expect it of yourself, right? And this is a cultural tool. I see now that in our culture, we use this as a weapon, because you're not going to rise up if somebody convinces you you're not worthy of rising up. And we have like kind of an epidemic of, some people call it imposter syndrome, and just that sense of I'm not good enough is so pervasive, when actually we are good enough. Like, we should all be asking, well, why not? Why aren't I good enough? We are good enough. we have to believe in ourselves. If our society doesn't believe in us, it's really important to believe in yourself, right? And just don't let other people's expectations keep you down. Really, it is about rising up and doing what you know in your heart you can do.
Yeah, and let's talk. So you have two, what I think are great key life lessons, and let's break these down. We have listeners all over right now connecting, like, wow, I understand exactly what Lisa's saying about, communicating, how it's so hard. I know I need to do it. So let's just back up. You went from a place where if you were emotional at all, go to your room. And now you're like with your husband, you're seeing the proper healthy is you talk about everything and work through it. What are some steps that you saw work in your life that can help someone struggling with that today?
A lot of it really is, I learned slowly. A lot of it I learned first from books before I learned it from other people. I was not encouraged to do well at school, but I read a lot. And when I started to learn what stories meant when I got to college and I became an English major, I understood what stories meant. I understood how to read them, and I understood myself as a story, what my story was, and owning my own story and going back and thinking about how my dad treated my mom, going back and putting together two and two, how they treated me with emotions, and thinking, well, gosh, maybe emotions aren't the problem, right? But I had to really own that sense of like, well, I was sort of sent to my room for my emotions and thinking they were bad and thinking they were shameful. And then you have to just start to question some of those things, but you have to really own the story before you can question them. So I would just say, my first step is really put together your story from the very, very beginning. How were you treated? What was useful? How was that helping you? How was that hurting you? How does that hold you back? And thinking about, what do you really believe in yourself? What can you do? Like, let go of what somebody else is telling you you can do or should do. Should is like one of those terrible words. It's so judgy.
Yeah. Yep.
Right? It's just, if someone's been telling you you should do this and you should do that, they're judging you. Like, let go of other people's judgment. Really tune in to what you know is right inside of you. And just know your story and know what's right for you.
And I love how you presented that, because so many times, even within places you wouldn't expect it, I keep hearing, especially the last 5 years, lower your expectations, put them on the ground. That way you're not disappointed. That is such BS. And it's so unbiblical. Yet you hear it out of people who call themselves Christians and they're in the church, leading churches. And I'm thinking to myself, there's nowhere in the Bible where Jesus says, lower your expectation, lower your standards so everybody can get above the stick. That's crap. That doesn't work in school. That doesn't work in work. That doesn't work in life. It's complete fallacy. So while I understand what they're trying to communicate is don't set yourself up for emotional failure, sometimes, no, a dad should be a dad. A mom should be a mom. A husband and a wife should be a husband and wife. So there are standards. There are, what's the word I'm looking for? Basic freaking life standards and principles, okay? That every human should respect and live up to. So I love how you mentioned that, but then you also have the balance when these other ignorant people are judging you, legitimately judging you, because there's a difference between friendship and good judgment and being judged.
Okay, true.
And that's another huge fallacy. As soon as you say, hey, like, I got a buddy, and I'm like, hey man, you really think you should be doing that? That's unhealthy. That's good judgment because I love my friend. That's not being judgmental. So I love how you had that balance between keeping standards for yourself, but when other people are putting ridiculous standards, you're like, disregard what they say, default to you and God. So talk about that a little bit, because that is something that we need. And it doesn't matter what nation you're in. You look at the politics in Canada right now. You look at the politics in America, in Italy, in Australia. People have lost their mind. There is no common sense in what actions are being taken in our governments across the world. So talk about this, because it's very important. Talk about setting expectations and where you find that balance, please, Lisa.
Look, I'm this is really near and dear to my heart, this idea of really allowing yourself to reach, right? And allowing yourself and believing in yourself. Sometimes, I don't know, if you read these books about all these celebrities, and it's always like, well, my mom told me I could be anything, like when they were in second grade or third grade or something. We don't all grow up like that, right? We don't all grow up with somebody saying, you can be anything. But what I would say to all of your listeners all around the world, you can be anything. The only thing stopping you is you, right? Just believe in yourself. And sometimes you can't believe in yourself, but sometimes the first step is like, well, why not? Why can't I? And I think that's really the stuff of heroes, is just to say, well, why can't I? And yeah, sometimes you are going to run up against social norms, but those are often norms that are designed to keep you down. You talked a little bit, David, about the politics of where all this is coming. I think that we are in a massive global shift. And it scares a lot of people. There's a lot of people who don't want the changes that are coming, and they're scared. And I get that, right? I can be compassionate with them and understand their fear. But these changes, yes, we have people from all over the world who are achieving things that they never could before because they have a cell phone, right? Honestly, when I started my business, I was an English teacher, but I had an internet connection and a computer and a cell phone. And let me tell you, and spreadsheets. Imagine what we before spreadsheets. When I was in college, you weren't even allowed to have a calculator in an exam, for a math exam.
Yes.
You had to do long division by hand. If you just made a little, didn't carry the one or something, you were not doing well. But it was like, you knew how to do it. All you needed was a calculator. Just believe in yourself and use the technology and ask, why can't I? Because I really believe you can. And I want to be respectful to the people who are afraid, but if they're afraid of new people and coming, look, are they really afraid of competing? They've been on top for a long time. There's a certain class of people who've been on top for a long time, and they haven't had to compete with the entire world. And now, yeah, we're going to open it up, and we are going to all have to compete. It doesn't mean everybody gets a smaller piece of the pie. If we all work together, we grow the pie. There's enough pie for everyone, right? Greed is a problem. Shutting other people down is the problem. If we all work together, that's when economies actually grow. There really, literally is more for everyone when economies grow. And that means working together, bringing down the barriers, understanding other people, and being inclusive, including everybody, not discriminating, whether it's, women, men, your religion, as we talked about, your where you come from, the color of your skin, that doesn't matter, right? What you bring, your attitude, your skills, your knowledge, what you can do, you may not even know what you can do yet, right? Give it a try. We all have these amazing tools at our fingertips in our phone now. It's amazing what you can do, but you have to let go of other people's opinions about what you can't do, right? You have to really believe in yourself.
Yeah, and we're going to get to what God allowed you to achieve, what you were alluding to, which is amazing. And you guys are going to love this story, what Lisa did. But going back to believing in yourself, it's like everything else. There's a lot of people that's a taboo message, and that's wrong. And hey, forgive me, I live near the Navy base. So if you're listening, and right now is just military convoy going over my condo. So I apologize for the background noise if you're hearing that. But what I was trying to get at is believing in yourself is a good, godly characteristic if it's balanced. Like, I have these gifts and abilities because God gave them to me.
Yeah.
David fought a bear and a lion. He wasn't afraid of Goliath because he knew God gave him the abilities. That's how we need to be. We need to be confident. We need to be assertive. We need to believe in ourselves, because all of us will be abandoned and alone at some point in life. And nobody's going to be there to pick you up. They're only there to kick you down. So,
Yes, for sure.
yeah. So when we get to those points, just like Lisa's saying, you have to have that personal relationship with God. You have to have that inner strength that says, if everybody's against me, that's fine. I got God for me. This is what he told me to do. Let's do it. So I love what you're saying, Lisa, and thank you so much. But there's so many people out there that get beat down, and then they're told that, oh, you're selfish if you believe in yourself. If you put your gas mask on first, you're wrong. You're selfish. If you go to the gym, that's wrong. Now, if you're in the gym 4 hours a day, that probably is wrong. But if you go to the gym to stay healthy, you're taking care of yourself so you can take care of your spouse and your children and your employees. So you have to take care of yourself, right?
I think you're 100% right. I really talk about, look, pride is a sin, right? It's one of the 7 deadly sins. We all know pride is a sin. But
yes,
pride
100%.
is when you really are selfish, when you really are putting yourself over other people. And when you say to somebody else, oh, you can't do that. Oh, you should lower that actually is your pride, keeping other people down, right? And there's a big difference between pride and self-esteem, self-worth, confidence. You can be confident without ever putting anyone down. You really don't need to judge somebody. If they want to go to the gym for 4 hours, everybody's different. They're going to do what they're going to do. I'm not going to judge them, right? I'm going to just say, yeah, even if you're unhealthy, right? Well, what is leading you? Like, I'm curious. I want to know. Well, why do you? Because I feel like they feel bad about themselves if they are doing, if they're smoking, or if they, aren't working out, or things like that. Those, I think that comes from not feeling good about yourself inside. And so I have
100%.
compassion for that.
Yeah. I think, you know what? And I'm going to bring this up. I want to hear your thoughts on it. I was under the impression my whole life that pride was I'm the best. And then when I was in college, someone gave me a book called The Calvary Road. It's one of the greatest books I've ever read outside of the Bible. Very small book. Like, I don't think there's a chapter that's more than 10 pages. And I couldn't read more than one chapter a day because it was just so powerful. But that book explained how pride, it's like the eye in the middle of pride. It's anytime we bring attention to ourselves. So most people interpret pride as I'm the best. But if you have the mindset, I'm the worst or I'm no good, that's actually a form of pride. And that's something God really convicted me with, because I thought I'm a functional idiot. I have no value. And I was like looking at myself in that kind of pride. So would you think with your experience, would that definition fit, or do you think it is isolated to lifting yourself up?
I just use different language because I do think it's confusing. And you're right, this word pride, you know, people will say, oh, you should be proud of yourself. You should have pride in what you do. And while that's true, there's just a limit, right? If you think of pride like on a bell curve, right? If you don't have any sense of self-worth, well, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to believe in yourself. And if you've got too much, you're arrogant. And
Yes.
right. And so there is like this zone in the middle where I feel like I believe in myself. I'm not going to tell anyone else what to do. I will lift them up. I'm not arrogant, but I'm no slump, right? I'm not nothing. I'm not everything. I am me. That's enough. That's all I need to be, is the best version of myself. That's all I ever want to be. I don't want to be anybody else. I don't want to be something I'm not, but I do want to be the best version of myself. I have compassion for people who have a hard time with that, either on the arrogant side or on the low self-esteem side. I'd rather have compassion than judgment, because
Yeah. And I
they're
love,
hurting.
yep. And I love how you talk about that gauge where the balance is in the middle. Left is crazy, right is crazy. And that goes along with the Bible. The Bible says a false balance is an abomination to the Lord, but a just weight is his delight. That balance is where we want to be. And we all fall, their gauge moves constantly, right? But that's exactly what Lisa's saying is where we want to be. We want to have that good, healthy balance. So
Right.
if you think you're the best thing in the world, or if you think you're a floor mat, you're wrong.
Both.
We need the balance. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so good. Well, let's
Yeah.
talk about this. We talked a little bit about your childhood. So anything we miss that's significant or important about your childhood that we haven't talked about that carries over into the story of your growing up, adolescence, teens, college, and where you are today. What have we missed in the Lisa story?
I think the only thing is the importance of stories to me, and how I learned to use stories as like such a powerful tool. I think storytelling is really important. It's really important to how I succeeded. But understanding what a story meant and how to use a story, because storytelling it's one of those things, it's in every single culture ever, right? It's one of the earliest human activities was storytelling. It's really ancient, and it serves this really important role of explaining us to ourselves. And I really, I read everything, but it wasn't until college that I really understood how to read a story. So the first day I went to Berkeley.
Hey, before you go there, we talked about this privately on our pre-call. How did you get into reading? Because you talked about how your parents didn't give you expectations really for school. You're like, doesn't matter if I fail or succeed. I
No,
get $1 for an A, or I can slack off all semester, get an F, and nobody says anything, right?
didn't
So,
matter. Like $1 was nothing, right? I
yeah,
mean,
right.
it didn't matter either way.
So how did you get a love for reading? Because that's something you hear every day, like every day, I hate to read. I hate to read. You have adults say, I hate to read. Oh, but there's so much freedom and power in reading. So where did that come from in Lisa's life?
I think it did come from, early childhood when there was so much lockdown, and I was a bundle of energy. And I think they just said, just sit down and read. And I found books very easily, very early on in my life. I read everything I could ever get my hands on from the early days of my life. And it was one of the things I was praised for. I was always praised by my parents about, oh, Lisa's our little reader, so that was encouragement that I loved. So I did that. I think it's how I got into college. I didn't do very well in my grades, but I had a crazy good vocabulary, because I was literally, by the time I was in high school, I was reading all of Hemingway, all of Faulkner. D.H. Lawrence, like all the British writers. Like I would literally read anything I got my hands on. And I didn't really think about stories or what they meant until I got to college. And when I realized that these characters are all archetypes, they show us the arc of a certain kind of character and what those characters' strengths or weaknesses or mistakes can do. I started to realize they were teaching me everything. I learned everything from stories. And when I learned how to read a book, suddenly I realized that is my education, right? I'm really kind of, in some ways, I think about myself as self-taught because I didn't have a lot of good friendships growing up. I was pretty locked down and didn't get social until later in life because I couldn't express myself. I couldn't even find my voice. I spent most of high school like hardly saying anything. And it takes a lot of psychic energy to take an active mind and like shut it down. But I was reading everything and I started to understand and own the story and understand how stories showed me the way. And I learned, that tragedy and feeling sad is the way we let go of things that we need to let go of. And that there are tragic heroes that help us let go of what we need to let go of and find the new way forward. I learned about mythic heroes, and this became part of of how I approach my business, right? Myths, these figures that are like impossible figures, I started to realize are actually figuratively the merging of two cultures. So the example I like to give is really early days, like hunter-gatherer cultures. When language was just beginning to form, we get evidence of cults, animal cults. There's bird cults and wolf cults and the bear cults. And then when horses were domesticated, we had horse cults because that was like their new god, right? They're just trying to figure out how this world works. And, we don't know what happened when the people of the horse cults rode up and met the people of the bird cults who were, idolized the eagles soaring above everything else. We don't know if they fought or whatever, but what we do know is that after a while, what we get in the caves is a picture of a horse with wings. And this is the picture merging in imagination, two cultures merging together. In fact, what is important? Transportation, flight, the flight of the imagination, but the flight of hooves on the prairie, right? And finding a way to come together and agree on something. And those were all really instructive for me for how to become the hero of my own life, deciding for myself, what kind of hero do I want to be? And that's part of believing in myself. Well, if I can own my story, I can write the ending. And I can say, well, here's where I'm going to go next. And that became a really powerful tool to be able to see my life as a story, own that story, and decide what the next chapter is.
Yeah, and that's so many great figures in history. They use stories to communicate. I mean, the greatest of all, Jesus, used stories and parables.
Of course.
You're a kid, you hear of Aesop's fables. So powerful.
And they're telling you about life. They're explaining you to yourself.
Yes, exactly. So during this process of stories, you're seeing a connection of letting go and healing. And, they always say every great story has the same characteristics, the same pieces, but it's just organized differently.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about letting go. That's something that people, myself included, have such a hard time with. you're hurt, something tragic, something traumatic happens in your life. What have you learned about letting go, the process of letting go? For our listeners who are just really, they've been wronged. What have you learned, Lisa, about letting go so they can heal?
Yeah, what I've really learned about letting go is that first you have to feel it. You have to feel the sadness. It's hard to let go. It's hard to let go of things you valued, things that, where you come from, all of that. And look, as the daughter of a Holocaust survivor, there was a lot of trauma. There was a lot of loss, an enormous amount of loss in my mother's life. And for a long time, she couldn't talk about it. She couldn't think about it. She wrote down her story. When I had my children, she wrote her story. I know most of what happened to her because she wrote it. And she would write every day and come to my house and she said, I printed it. I didn't even save it on my computer. She had a very early computer way back. And she would give me 10 or 15 pages. And I was typing it into my computer going, oh my gosh, all the trauma that she experienced. But and she would cry every day. She would come and she would say here, and she would cry, and I would hold her and just hold space for her to be sad. But I'll tell you, when she finished her story and now suddenly her truth was out there and she could share it with me and my siblings, with her children, but also with her grandchildren, who she didn't know how much time she would have with them. And she knew her story was going to live and that they would understand what she survived to be here. And that was so powerfully healing. So I would just say, tell the story and feel the sadness. And, even with mourning, like when my mom passed away, I had a real hard time with it. I really did. I had 6 months where I was in a complete funk. But you just have to feel it, and you have to trust your body is processing that. And it will shift. It will shift. You have to give it space. If you don't, if you lock it down, if you say, I'm not going to be sad, I'm going to be strong. If you don't feel it, that feeling, that you're supposed to feel it, right? So it gets stuck because you're not expressing it. You're not crying. If there's something sad, you should cry. You're not going to be sad forever. Just trust it. You're not going to be sad forever. Being sad is the process of letting go. And after a while, you'll realize, okay, I'm sad, but now I don't want to be sad anymore. Now I'm ready to see what's next. And then you're free. But if you bottle it up, you're never free.
Yeah, and let me ask you this. I was literally just having a conversation about this topic with someone, and I don't want people to be mad at me, but it's something that needs to be said, and you can tell me what your thoughts are. All over the world, this is an issue, but especially in America, pharmaceutical companies run the country. They run the politicians, they bribe them, they own them. It's disgusting. We are taught you have a problem, you take a drug. That has never been around the history of the world, and it's not healthy. Now, I'm not saying there's not a place for drugs. I'm not saying some people don't need certain drugs. But when you're taking 17 drugs a day, there's a big problem. And what Lisa just said is to let go. You got to tell your story. You got to feel the pain. And if you're doping yourself, and I don't care if it's from the doctor or if it's from somebody in the corner, if you're taking drugs, you're doping yourself. It's just going to perpetuate the real problem because you're treating the symptoms. That's how I feel. What are your thoughts on that, Lisa?
I think you're right. Like if you are taking it to not feel something, and again, whether that's alcohol or something else or something the doctor, if you're taking a drug not to feel, that's going to get in your way. Ultimately, it's just going to bottle you up. It's going to lead to more drugs, and the pharmaceutical companies will have a heyday with you. You're serving their needs. They're not serving your needs. we get afraid of our feelings, and we're told to be strong. But sometimes it's just better. You know, a friend of mine who's really wise said to me, the thing about feelings is to feel them. Just feel them and trust it. I do think, and I will say, the only caveat to what you said is that certain people with a diagnosable disorder, if you're bipolar, or if you have manic, you know, if you're really in a kind of depression that is beyond, right? Beyond just sadness, like there's sadness and then there's depression. So if you really are have a diagnosable disorder, mental disorder, that you probably do need to be treated. And that too can be freeing, because it frees you from the grip of a chemical imbalance, right? And I think we have to think about the emotions as a physical thing that you do have to process through, just like we process through our food and our air cycles in and out. Our emotions are a living, breathing thing, and they come in, we express them, and they come out, and we're healthier for it, just like we're healthy for eating right, and just like we're healthy for breathing deeply. And it's a part of us. And so, you know, you got to keep them in balance. You've got to trust them. You've got to think about them. Wow, why am I feeling that way? Connect it to the story. What is happening to make you feel? You'll be smarter. You'll be smarter about how you do that. You know, if you're in a toxic relationship and there's somebody who's making you feel bad all the time, whoever that toxic person is, they're in pain. You can forgive them. You can let them go. But you don't have to stay in a relationship that beats you down. You don't. Sometimes you have to let go of certain people in your life. It's sad. And you can feel sad about it. You can feel sorry for them. You can feel compassion. But you don't need them. You can move forward in a positive way. But you do have to really take care of your emotional self the way we take care of our physical body. Really, I believe that.
Yeah, and I agree with you completely. You remind me of one of our guests, George Hoffman. Fantastic guy, but he was clinically diagnosed with bipolar. But if you look at the course of people diagnosed with what he has, this is the life just down.
It's so sad. Yeah.
But he took a balanced approach. He did take pharmaceuticals to get him better, but then he also had biblical meditation, and he did exercise, and he keeps that honest flowing communication. He's got now a wife and a daughter. So if you go back and listen to his story, or if you haven't listened to it already, I mean, the guy should have been in a psychiatric ward, written off and locked in there for the rest of his life. And now the guy's writing books, helping people, thriving, has an amazing life, hasn't had an outbreak in, I think it was like 30 years.
Wow.
So imagine somebody with bipolar, all these different clinical disorders. So that's what I'm saying. I think you and I are on the same page. There has to be a balance. I'm not saying all drugs are bad.
Right.
But what I will say is you shouldn't use it as a crutch or a cure, and you should do everything you can to heal. And the ultimate goal is to get off everything.
Right.
And some people, it's not possible, right?
Right.
I really, from the people I've met in my personal life, I don't want Facebook fact checkers, right? In my personal life, the people I met who actually have reality, right? Not look like a clown and sit in office and tell people what to think. Those people, almost every one of them has got well and stayed well and can get off the drugs. There's very few people who legitimately have a medical issue. But you're right. It's all about balance. It's all about perspective. So let's go back to you, though. You have a girl who loves reading, doesn't care about school. How did she get to college? You know, how did that happen?
Yeah. I think I just got very lucky. Honestly, I do think all of that reading, it made me a good writer. It gave me a great vocabulary. I scored really well on the SAT. I had bad grades, but I scored well on the SAT. And there was just that magical moment where I had one college counseling session. My parents never asked me about, I went to boarding school. Eventually, I did go to boarding school, which I think was really stabilizing for me. There were more rules in my boarding school than there were at home. And that was a really stable place for me. And they didn't have grades. I went to the Putney School. It's on a farm in Vermont. I was really lucky to go there, just really lucky. And they didn't bother me with grades, and was able to sort myself out. But as a senior, I go in, and it's in Vermont, and it's maybe October. And the guy looked at me, and I didn't know him. I'd never met him before. And he said, well, where do you want to go to college? And I was thinking, because I had frostbite on my toes and I had frostbite on my fingers. And I thought, California? Like, honestly, it just came out. Like, why don't we just go to college in California? I will at least be warm. And he goes, okay. And he looked down at my record and he goes, you have the points to get into Berkeley. And I don't know how. I think it was the SAT. And I said, okay. And he goes, do you want to apply anywhere else? I said, Stanford. Because it was the only other school in California I'd ever heard of. So I applied to 2 schools in California. I got into one. I did not get into Stanford. And I went to Berkeley, and it was the best place for me ever. Like, the English department was second only to Yale, and they were brilliant and fascinating. And I learned to own stories, and I could read as much as I wanted. And suddenly that was a strength, not a distraction from my life. Because when I was a kid, reading was a distraction from everything else. But now suddenly the stories were part of what I could do. And the first part of my career, I was an English teacher. I was a high school English teacher. Actually, I got a PhD in English after college, and then I got married and I had 2 kids, and then I was an English teacher for a while. So that really stood me in good stead. And I was, even after I had my kids, I kept teaching, and I was the first working mother in my home. A lot of the other women in my family worked until they had kids, and then they quit. And I was expected to quit, but I just didn't quit. That was kind of, I just kept going. And that I got encouragement from my professors who said, you should be in this program. You don't need to quit. We'll find a way. And they did. They found a way to help me get through that program, even with kids. I'm just really grateful to the people who are encouraging me in that program to get me in, and for me to understand how that works to balance work and life. And my kids were so proud of their mom as a teacher. You know, it was really, they were so thrilled. And I was lucky to be able to be around them a lot, because you know, I could leave at 3 o'clock. My job was done when their job was done. I had roughly the same vacations they did. So that worked out pretty well when my kids were young, to spend a lot of time with them, but still be a working mom.
Yeah, and there's something to be said for that. I'm not a public school model supporter, but I worked in a college and I taught, and it was great having the same schedule as my kids. You have the whole summer off together and you can spend a ton of family time. So for the mental welfare of the teachers, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah. It's a great career for balance, work-life balance.
Yes.
Especially when your kids are little.
Yeah. So now you're in school, you get a degree, you're working. Take us between there and today.
Okay. Well, so I'm married right out of college. My husband is a movie producer. It took me 10 years to be able to say that sentence without busting out laughing, because I think the least likely, I think my high school would have voted me least likely to marry a movie producer. He's terrific. And
what types of movies, if you want me asking, what types of movies does he produce?
He's produced some movies you would probably know. He produced Sleepless in Seattle.
Phenomenon.
Yeah. A little small thing called Sleepless in Seattle. And do you know Tin Cup? I'm not sure if that was if that movie traveled, but that's
Kevin Costner.
Kevin Costner
And Rene Russo, right?
And Rene Russo, that's exactly right.
Wow, that's a great movie.
Yep. And he did The Soloist, actually speaking about mental illness, The Soloist with Jamie Foxx and Robert Downey Jr. about the homeless musician on the streets of LA. That was a pretty amazing, life-changing film actually for him, because he got involved in the issue of homelessness after that. That was shot on the streets of LA on Skid Row. And he is chairman of the board of one of the largest homelessness services agency in Los Angeles. He's really taken that up as the service he gives back. Is he works with people who and helps try to lift people up off the streets. So he did The Soloist. He did a movie called Denial, which is a movie about a Holocaust denier and bringing him to court and making sure it was basically he put the Holocaust on trial. And it was really important to make sure that people understood, yes, the Holocaust did happen.
And that sounds like people laugh, but that's a serious issue. There's kids going through school today being told it never happened. It's a lie. I'm like, this is insanity. That it's so far-fetched. Recorded history, every country of the atrocities that Hitler and the Nazi Party did, and now they're trying to say it didn't happen. It's
right.
crazy.
That's right. And so many people died fighting that war, and it really desecrates the memory of the people who defeated that kind of evil, to say that it didn't happen. And look, there's climate deniers now too. People who say climate change isn't happening. I mean, look out! If anyone who remembers what the weather was like 3-4 decades ago, it's just not the same. Really, it's not. We all feel it in our bones, and the denial of those important things just, that gets my moral center.
Yeah, I think there's a huge difference between that, and this is why. If you want to argue what's real and what's fake with climate, that's a argument, data, science, cycles, that stuff that can be researched and argued both ways. The scary part about the Holocaust is that's fact. It happened. Millions of people were involved, but evil people are trying to erase history, because if you don't know history, you're bound to repeat it. So that's why I'm like, if somebody wants to think the earth is flat or round, whatever. If they want to think about climate change or not climate change, whatever. But if they're saying that history did not happen and they're rewriting history, they're a terrorist and they're anti-human. So that's why, to me, it's like saying I bumped into somebody by accident and I stabbed them 37 times in the face. See what I'm saying? To me, that's like a huge difference. So I'm thankful your husband made that movie.
Yeah, he really did. And I'll just, and I agree with you that there are arguments, and climate is really complicated, and you can take a little bit and try to show it. But frankly, look, if you really look at the history and you start looking at the millions of years of history on this planet, right? Water has been like 1,000 feet lower in the Ice Age. It was 1,000 feet lower. I live on Martha's Vineyard. In the last Ice Age, Martha's Vineyard was connected on dry land to the mainland. That water is now 1,000 feet deep. But water has also been higher. And when the dinosaurs were here 60 million years ago, when the dinosaurs were around, water was all the water that was in the ice caps had melted, and it was hundreds of feet higher. Hundreds of feet higher. And can you imagine what will happen? And all those, when the dinosaurs died, their bodies got buried under dust for literally 60 million years, and they became compressed. And that is why we call it fossil fuels. Those are the fossils of dinosaurs. We are letting, that was a natural form, God's way of carbon sequestration. And we have spent the last century and a half digging all that up and releasing it back into the air. Our water is expected to rise a foot in the next couple of decades, but it could go a lot higher. And I think this is very dangerous thinking to say you can argue either way, because we are talking about people's lives. And if water, 1 foot is one thing, 30 feet. Imagine how many people will die if water is 30 feet higher, how much land we lose. It's,
Yeah,
we have to really think about, do we want to let that natural God-given carbon sequestration out of the ground anymore? And that's a moral issue to me too.
Yeah, I had a guest, Tom Bowman, on the podcast, and that's his whole purpose is climate change. And we didn't agree in every aspect, but I'm like you, I think you need to be responsible in everything God gave you, and we need to be wise with the resources. And like Tom and I discussed, the data, he's going to interpret it differently than I'm going to interpret it, or you're going to interpret it. But the things we know are right and the things we know are true, we just got to do it. And we got to make sure we're being just stewards. So obviously when people are like pouring, like oil companies, it's a joke. They pour so many chemicals in the ocean every day.
Oh yeah.
And they get a slap on the wrist fine. It's like $1 to them. So it's like, there is
still oil drilling subsidies. Do you know we have subsidies for Exxon and Shell and Mobil? All of those, they're subsidized.
Yeah, we'll have to get into that in another podcast episode, because I want to get back to your story. And it's not that this isn't important. It's just that it's so frustrating, and we're not going to solve the world's problems. No. So let's encourage people with your story. And going back to your husband, he sounds like he's a remarkable guy too, because those aren't like small, no-name, low-budget movies. Those are huge global hits. So let's start tying things up. So climate change, we'll shelf that. Your husband, is he still actively making movies, or does he not make movies anymore? What's his situation?
And I'll get to that in a minute. So I will tell you, I was an English teacher. And he's making some movies here and there. And then one day he comes to me, my kids were I had one in 8th grade and one in 10th grade. And he said, hey, I've got this movie in Australia. Why don't we take the kids out of school and go to Australia for 6 months?
Nice, smart guy.
I was like, all right. I mean, that just sounded like a great family adventure. We always wanted to do something and get our kids that global view of life, and what a great life experience that would be, to go for a semester somewhere. So the school is great. My school said to me, if there is a job when you come back, you can apply. So I'd been teaching there for 9 years. And I thought I was fired, but I put my family first.
Good for you. That's the right decision.
I mean, if I have to get another job, I'll get another job, but I'm not getting another family. And he's going, and he can't commute from Australia. So we're all going. So we all went down there, and I decided, so Gary made Sleepless in Seattle, and Nora Ephron on that told me this great story. She said that when she was a little girl and her mom was in the hospital having her baby sister, her grandmother took her out to lunch. And she was kind of upset because she kind of liked things the way they were. She wasn't sure about having another little sister around. And the grandmother said, well, if you're going to be a big sister, you should be the best big sister ever. You can do that. You can be the best. You might as well be the best, because it's going to happen. And that was her life's philosophy, right? If you're going to be something, you might as well be the best. Try your very hardest to be the best. And Nora was like an excellent. She was like, all right, this big sister thing, I'm going to kill it. So I kind of took that philosophy and I spun it to Australia, because I hadn't been a stay-at-home mom ever. And I didn't know what a stay-at-home mom did. But I was like, I'm going to find out. I'm going to be the best stay-at-home mom in Australia. Like, I'm just going to be the best.
That's awesome.
And I go there, and on the first day, we go to the grocery store, and I'm going to stock up. And because I know there's going to be hot breakfast, that's part of being the best mom, right? We got to get food in the house. And I get to the checkout stand, and my jet lag is kicking in, and we're all exhausted. And the woman at the checkout stand says, "Would you like a bag?" And I'm thinking, that is the dumbest, like, in my mind, my first thought is, that is absurd. Of course I want a bag. How am I going to get all this? But I remembered I had pledged to be the best stay-at-home mom. So I looked around before I said anything. I just looked around. What does she expect of me? And we talked about expectations and how powerful they are, that social capital and expectations. And the woman in front of me had all of her groceries packed in these kind of green bags that stood up, and they looked like canvas a little bit. And then the woman behind me had an armful of those bags. And I realized I was expected to say, "Oh no, that's all right. I brought my own." But of course I didn't have my own. Luckily, I see a stack of these bags for 99 cents Australian, which is 75 cents American. And I'm like, okay, we can do that, right? And I said, "Oh, I'll take a few of these." So I grabbed a couple, put them on the belt, put my groceries in these 2 bags, and they were lighter. They were easier to carry. I didn't go back and forth from my house to the kitchen, from the car to the kitchen. I just had everything in these 2 bags, and it all came in one trip. And I thought, well, that's easy. And then I filled up my fridge, and I realized I hadn't filled up my trash can. And I thought, well, that's good. I didn't need all that packaging and trash, all those bags, because what are you going to do with them? In some side, you have to find a place to put all those bags. And hopefully you reuse some of them, but there's usually more than you can ever reuse. And it was so wasteful. And I was like, oh. So I stuck the bags by the front door. And when my kids came home from school, they said, "Oh, hey, can I have one of these for my gym stuff?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you can have one," because, they were 99 cents. So I got 2 more, and I stuck it by the door. And a couple of days later, Gary says, "Hey, can I have one of these for my scripts?" Because he was carrying paper scripts around before they were iPad, PDFs. And I'm like, "Sure, have as many as you want." So we had 6 or 8 of those. And we loved Australia. It was fantastic. We saw koala bears and kangaroos and wallabies, and we made such good friends, and the food was great. We loved it. But when it came time to leave 6 months later, I said to Gary, the thing that I can't live without now are these bags. And I started to think about, why are we doing it? And I talked to a friend of mine. She goes, the government made a whole push. And I discovered a report that Australia had done. Its findings are widely accepted about what the impact of all those bags were. It was, America was using 1 billion bags a day at the
Before
time.
you go on too, what year was this?
2005.
2005. Okay. I just want to make sure we have a timeline so people,
Right.
like me and you growing up, this wasn't even really a discussion. And now you're in Australia, and it's like literally changing your life. So that's why I just want to make sure we put a timeline in there.
Yeah. Yeah. And I remembered back in the 80s, when I was a young mom, and I was like thinking, these plastic bags came out, and everyone said they were so bad for the environment, but they were so much better than the paper bags because they didn't rip. And if you're walking your groceries home, and I was living in New York City then for a year, and like those plastic bags were a lifesaver because it was bad weather and you had to get your groceries home. But the sheer number of them was enormous. And I started to learn what the impacts were, how many, like there was enough petroleum in 14 bags to drive your car a mile. And we were taking on average 10 per person. So if you've got 2 people in your house, you've got enough plastic bag to drive your car a mile, and you're using them for 10 minutes, maybe 20 minutes, and then you're throwing it away. And it seemed like a terrible waste. Why were we taking all of our petroleum and throwing it away like that? If that's a precious resource, why are we throwing it away? 1 billion of them a day. So it stopped making sense to me, all that waste and what we have to do. We were doing $40 billion a year in cleanup costs, the US alone, $40 billion a year. And it's like, well, wait a minute, who's paying that?
Yeah, and what does that include? Like when you say the cleanup cost, is that picking up on the road, pulling out of sewers? What does that mean?
All of it. That's the estimated cost of pulling them off the beach, pulling them out of, they get jammed in recycling, and the money we spend trying to get them up off our roadsides. Yes, about a third of them were estimated to escape trash collection. So we're talking about a third of a billion bags every day into our environment. Now, this was 2005, and I don't know if you remember, but I remember when I came back from Australia, I realized suddenly there were bags everywhere. They were wafting over, you could just see them, like wafting over the roadways every single day. They would blow right up to my house. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're talking to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, you see them to this day. You'll be driving, they'll be flying up in a tree and getting caught in a branch, and they're everywhere. And let me ask you this question. I want you to get through the story and hit the key points, but I'm immediately thinking, so when it's appropriate to answer this, please answer this, because I'm a guy, I go to the grocery store, I get 15 bags, I come back to my condo, unload everything, put all the bags in one bag, and then I use those in little trash cans around my house, right? But I always thought
All of them? Do you use all of them, David? Like, be honest.
No,
Are
I
you
honestly,
using 15 you're using 15 bags every single week, and how much trash do you have?
no, that's just it. I'm like, I will literally take the bags, put them in one bag, use them, and then I don't buy trash bags. That's how I operate, because I'm a super, okay, I don't even know how to explain myself, because I'm not cheap. Like if we went out to dinner, man, I'd buy dinner for everybody and have fun and not think twice.
But you're not
But if I
wasteful.
bought, but
You're
I'm
not
not wasteful. So, but if I bought myself a burger at a fast food restaurant and I was by myself, I'd be pissed off at myself for spending $2, right? But so I always try to reuse stuff. But the thought that was always stuck in my head about plastic bags is, how does it dissolve at the dump? Or is it just, am I locking everything in? So that's literally the question I want you to answer. I put trash in it, disgusting stuff, could be organic, could be non-organic. And then I tie that bag shut, throw it in the dumpster gets picked up by the trash throws it in a big pile. What happens
And then
then?
what happens? Then, and that's part of the cost of it, David, we are landfilling billions of bags and everything else that we our throwaway society, all those single-use plastic anything, plastic forks, plastic anything, we are landfilling, and we pay. It costs us a lot of money. Our governments pick up that trash, put it in big pits. A landfill is just a big field that's been hollowed out, filled with concrete, so it doesn't go back into our land. And we're just maintaining those big pits. It takes a lot of manpower, it takes a lot of land, and that's part of the cost of it, besides just pulling them out of the roadway, and they get stuck in everything. And there's a lot that we don't get, even though we're trying to clean them up. We've got a third of them onto those trees and the electrical wires and things like that, and they break up into tiny pieces. The wind, the sun, the rain will break them up into tiny little bits into the gutter and wash them into the ocean.
Now,
these tiny bits. So if you put, like, theoretically, the ocean currents swirl around in a big, it's like a big toilet bowl, but there's no flush. It's just swirling against the shores of our continents, right? So theoretically, if you put a rubber ducky, it's in San Francisco, San Francisco or Santa Monica, right, and let it swirl around, it would take 12 years for it to swirl in smaller and smaller circles and get to the center of the ocean. Until we had plastic, everything that fell into the ocean would biodegrade, and the center of the ocean was pristine. Everything had biodegraded before it got there. But with the advent of plastic, it does not. We don't know how many thousands of years This stays. So what we get in the middle of our oceans, this is called the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. You can read a lot about it. The North Pacific Gyre, the Pacific is filled with plastic, these tiny plastic bits, more or less sloshing around with water because they're tiny. By the time they get there, they're broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. We put collectively around the world the equivalent of a dump truck's worth of plastic into our ocean every minute.
That's
Every
insane.
minute. It's insane.
And that's not America. That's the whole world.
Globally. But the oceans belong to everybody. And scientists expect there will be more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050.
Now, can you, and this isn't, I seriously, like when I think plastic, you burn plastic, it reeks, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
how do you properly, let's say you just got this monster scoop, you scoop it all out. Now, how do you deal with it properly? Like, what would
First
you
of all,
do?
you can't scoop because you would scoop out all the fish. You would leave a sterile ocean. You would destroy it by scooping it.
I was just using that as an example,
but
like
yeah,
skim scoop. I'm
if
just saying,
we
but
could get
you
it
had a
out,
dump truck of trash, you have a dump truck of plastic. Can it be remelted and reused? Is it just no good? Will it burn a layer in the ozone? Like I've heard people say, if you burn stuff, you know, the actual fumes and the gases will burn a hole in the ozone. So how do you properly even deal with this plastic?
yeah, we landfill it. That is the best way. That's our best choice. It's not a very good choice. The best thing, really the best thing, is when you say reduce, reuse, and recycle, it's a hierarchy. You should reduce your plastic. You just shouldn't be using as much, right? If you think of a reusable bag, and this is what I got hooked on, right? That kind of waste just hit my moral center. It was wrong. I was ashamed of America throwing away so many bags every day. Ireland had already done a plastic tax in 2002. Australia was getting rid of plastic bags without a tax in 2005, just by changing the question at checkout. If you came up with 3 things to a checkout stand, they would not offer you a bag. And they would offer you a bag if you had more than 3 things, but they would say, would you like a bag? That expectations, rather than saying paper or plastic. The default was you should bring your own. And that changing that question was really powerful. And that's another one of those things that I learned as an entrepreneur. When you change the question, sometimes you change everything. Sometimes you realize you've been asking the wrong question. Paper or plastic was the wrong question, because paper bags too, 4 times the emissions of a plastic bag, 4 times. And then if they're recycled and we're trucking them around as trucking costs, 80% of them were still ending up in landfill, even though they're recyclable, but people aren't recycling them. 80% were, and then we have to put them in. So if we want to keep making plastic and putting it in landfill, we're just going to have bigger and bigger landfill. We have to pay for that. There's a cost to all of this. Every time you throw something away, there is no away. There is only here. Every piece of plastic that's ever been made, that straw you used at your 8th grade birthday party, yeah, it is somewhere. It is in a landfill or broken up into little bits on a gutter somewhere and washed into the ocean or somewhere in between. It is here somewhere, all this plastic. So I think we have to be mindful about our plastic and use it. It's not a cheap thing that you throw away. It is a precious resource. It comes from our petroleum. These are precious resources. We should be reusing them.
Yeah. And I like that, you know, people listening to this podcast, some are like, I don't care. Some people are like, oh, I'm absolutely doing everything I can to be a just steward and of the environment. There's other people like, I don't think it's a real issue. So there's people all over the board
But
listening
we're
to
all
this
paying
podcast.
for it. Just don't forget what unites
Oh, no,
us
no.
is that we're all paying for it.
No, I'm
Through our
getting
taxes.
there. That's where I'm getting. It doesn't matter if you believe in climate change or not. We're all God's creatures, and this is a planet he gave us. And whether it was around 60 million years or how I believe 6,000 years, the fact is it's our planet.
Mhm.
And if we have this planet, like just talking to you, you're saying things and you're explaining the way that I've never thought of them. And there's no reason why I can't buy like 10 bags and bring them to the grocery store. There's literally no reason. So when we're done talking, next time I go to the grocery store, buying reusable bags. And then I'm going to keep reusing them. So, but then now I run into this next question is, okay, so do I buy plastic bags now for my big trash cans? Like, or is there a better solution for that? So like, if we were to be real practical, like, okay, I may not have the calling to change the world in this area like you do, but I want to do my daily part. So for me and the listeners like me who want to do our daily part, what are some tips you have for us? Like, because you buy paper, you say that's 4 times more emissions and you're killing trees. We buy plastic, it lasts forever and it flies up and goes in the ocean. So what are the alternatives you suggest?
So reusable bags are definitely the way to go. And if you think about what, how to line your trash bags, think about what's in your trash. How much are you throwing away? One of the statistics that also really blew my mind at the time is we overproduce our food, right? We produce and we throw away a third of our food.
Organic. I remember being in Italy, you have a recycle for organic, just the food waste. Then you have the paper, then you have the glass. They were fanatical. Like they went way too far with it, but they actually had organica, exactly what you're saying, because people wasted so much food.
And that's, if you think about like being stewards, right? God gives us, we have the amazing miracle of like, you give it sun and water and you get apples and vegetables and fruit. And we take care of our animals, we get meat. And if you take care of them humanely, this is a cycle we can all do, right? But why are we taking a third of what is given and throwing it into a landfill? A landfill, right? Why aren't we putting it back? That is our organic waste. That is valuable. That is the earth, the soil. So instead of putting it back, composting it and giving ourselves rich, beautiful soil for the next round of growing season, right? We're putting it in a landfill and then we're putting chemicals on our field. And this is not a sustainable way to be. This is not the way the earth wants to be. We can have a planet that is, it's supposed to be cycling. The thing the tree doesn't want, the leaves every year, it goes down. That's the tree's food. The tree drops what it wants to eat. And it's been doing that for thousands of years without our help. But when we interrupt that and take a third of it and start putting it into landfill, now we have to pay for that. And now we're producing things we don't want into the ocean, back into our environment. And we're taking the things that we do want back in the environment and we're putting it into landfill. And it just doesn't make sense. The organic stuff should go back in the earth. Anything that's toxic, you should recognize it. Use as little as possible. It's toxic. It's toxic. Let's use as little as possible and reuse it. It's a precious resource too. Don't just throw it away and think, oh, it's gone. It's not gone. It's still here. And you're paying for it in your taxes.
Yeah. And it's a whole other aspect. Being from outside of Boston, Milford, Mass, recycling there is a completely different picture than recycling in Pensacola, Florida.
Yep.
And then a lot of people trust the government is taking what they're paying for in the counties and doing what they're told. But how many counties are completely lying and they're just taking the money and putting the same as your trash? Super frustrating, super, like, to me, it just makes me furious. But again, that's another podcast. I don't want to bring you off on a political topic, even though it's very important. So you go to Australia, you see this whole different mindset. Like you said, it's just the way they phrase the questions that made you think as a consumer, Take us from there to the story of the business you started.
So I learned about the impacts and I came back and all I could talk about was bags. People are like, how was Australia? Like reusable bags, reusable bags. It was like crazy. They're like, well, what about koala bears? Yeah, they were really cute, but the reusable bags were like life-changing. And one day I kept saying, America, we have to go reusable. We have to do it. And a friend of mine just said, no, Lisa, we don't have to do anything. You are obsessed. You have to do something. And when she said that, I was like, it was just one of those moments where someone says something to you that just feels true, right? It just hits you. And I realized I had to do something. I really did have to do something. So I started thinking about what I could do, right? And I don't like asking people for money, so I wasn't going to do a nonprofit. And anyway, people couldn't go reusable if we didn't have reusable bags here. So I started a company to sell reusable bags. And basically my only expectation, I didn't know I'd make any money, but I told my husband I promised not to lose any money or maybe not much. And I promised, but I wanted people to go reusable and see how easy that was in their life, how their life was better and cleaner and less waste, and how good you could feel about that, right? A 99-cent bag. I developed a story. I started with storytelling, and I told the tragic life of a plastic bag, used for 10 minutes, discarded forever, breaking up into little bits, going into the ocean. Those plastic bits are coming back on our plate. They're coming back in our fish. They're coming back in our food, and we're eating them, and it's affecting our health now. It's not just our wallets. It's our health. The microplastics, they are really very toxic. And I just realized, I have to do it. So I told that story. And then I told this mythical news story of a new bag that makes zero waste for 2 years. And
now, when you say
I
tell the
sold that for
story,
99 cents.
now when you say told the story, did you have commercials made? Was it just your dialogue and conversation? Where was the story being shared?
So I was an English teacher. So I literally started making cold calls on the faculty, on the stairway overlooking the faculty parking lot. I would teach first, second, and third period. Then I had a fourth period break, and I'd go on the faculty staircase and I would cold call small stores across America. And I would tell the story of plastic bags. I would say, I've got a new bag from a new technological fabric. It makes no waste for 2 years, and it cost 99 cents. And I had, for a cold calling list, I had more than half of people who wanted a sample, and the sample started turning into orders. I ordered bags. I found a fantastic supplier, which is a whole other story, but she's like one of my best friends. I started supplying bags from her. It's just kind of a miracle that we found each other, but we were best friends and partners in business for many years. And I was selling bags in very small amounts at first, but I hit a hockey stick curve. I just hit a moment, and it's that message of me there. And I went to Expo West, which is the largest natural foods expo. And I just wandered around. Somebody sponsored a bag for me, a badge, so I could get in. And I started talking and telling that story to everybody. And I did it at a pitch, a media pitch event. I got coverage. It just started getting picked up on day 3 of that event. It was on the loudspeaker that attendees were allowed no more than 7 plastic bags every day, because people were wandering around with 20, 30, 40. They would get a plastic bag from every vendor getting samples. And then suddenly there was this huge awareness right there. And it just started to spill out. So I just told anybody who would listen, I would call people up, I would talk to, but it was really a tipping point, There was just, I hit a hockey stick curve. I sold 250,000 bags that first year in business. I quit teaching. I sold 2 million bags my second year, and I sold 8 million bags my third year. And it was hang on to your hat. I did have a website, and people were calling me, and I just wrote orders as fast as I could write them for the first 5 years of my business, and just tried to keep up and get good at logistics and good at delivering on my promises to my customers. And that's just how I saw it. I just sat there and delivered what I promised.
That's incredible. And so you started the business in 2007. What year was that?
2005.
2005. And from 2005 to 2010, you were doing 8 million. That is awesome and incredible. And for a business model, everybody dreams of that, right?
It's a dream, but it kind of feels like a nightmare. Like, first of all, you need to cash flow it. And that was a crazy moment. And there was just a lot going on.
So when you had this huge growth in business, there's just as many, if not more, businesses that go out of business from hyper growth as there are from businesses who are struggling for customers. How did you handle it going from a teacher, a wife and mother, to now you're running a very successful and high-end business?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really grateful that I had the technological tools, right? I was using spreadsheets to track everything. I was using QuickBooks to track the money. And I got to this point. I got my two biggest purchase orders that first year. I suddenly had one from Ralph's and one from Vitamin Cottage in Denver for 100,000 bags. And I was working really hard to process those, and I processed them and I placed them. And then I realized I had to pay for them, and then they would arrive here. It took a while to get them to arrive in America. And then once I got it to my customer, I still had to wait 30 days. And I was like, holy moly, what am I gonna do? Like, I don't have that kind of money to pay my supplier and wait for 3 months for that to come in. So I told Gary, I told my husband, I was like, I said, I can go to the bank and take them my purchase orders, or we can put our life savings in there. And he said, let me think about it for a few days. And honestly, like, I'm so grateful that he believed in me. And ultimately he backed me, and we did, and we put our life savings in there. And I said, when I get paid back, because he saw the purchase orders that I was getting from my clients and the purchase orders that I was sending to my supplier. And I said, I'm making money, right? You make with a product like that, you make a tiny bit on each one. But when it starts to be hundreds of thousands or millions of bags, it's a pretty decent piece, right? And a lot of it went into, the kind of having a company then, and having people, truckers and warehouse workers, and it just kept taking bites out of it. It all worked out fine. I'm not a millionaire, right? But I took my little slice of the pie, which is all I needed. But I'm really lucky that he believed in me, and he's always believed in me. And he said, just go for it. We'll do it. And the bank would have done it too. If I brought in that would have been legit. And maybe it would have fueled my growth as an entrepreneur and kept me more grounded in, doing the kind of reporting I should be doing. But frankly, when you're going from like 0 to 8 million bags in 2 or 3 years, you don't have time to do the reporting. Like, it's coming in. Like, just keep going. You've got a machine. You just have to feed the beast. And eventually it did take me 3 years before I ever, even though it wasn't until I was doing 8 million, got kind of plateaued, that I could even take a salary. I didn't even take a salary for those first 4 years. Everything that came in went back into the business. I took nothing.
Now, let me ask.
Really keep your head down a lot.
Yeah, and people who've never experienced that, it's hard to wrap their mind around.
Yeah.
But it's a real phenomenon. Like, when you're running a business, that doesn't mean you're rich and successful. There's so many small business owners who are the heartbeat and backbone of America, and yet they live a harder life than most people because they're killing themselves to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, everybody sees the end result, but the average overnight success, if you're listening and not watching, I'm doing air quotes, right? but the average overnight success takes 8 to 11 years. So
Yeah.
there is no such thing as an overnight success. Maybe that one moment you get the check, but it took 8 years to get there. So when you were doing this, you have a huge learning curve. There's a lot of fear. I mean, you're putting your life savings at risk because what if there was because again, to clarify, these bags, were they branded to the customer specifications? Were they branded to your only? So Lisa's telling us that she actually put the customer's logo on there or customer's message.
That's right. And that's what my first customers all said to me. They said, if it's a bag, it's got our name on it.
Exactly. So when you think of reusing, you can't reuse a bag at Wegmans that came from Stop and Shop. You know what I mean?
Yeah, people do all the time. Actually, people do all the time.
No, not the consumer. I'm saying if you got a big order that was returned or there was something they weren't happy with, like you did everything right, but your manufacturer let you down, the quality wasn't there, and you have $100,000 return, that's a massive loss. That's just a straight up loss. So you had pressure. It wasn't just, woohoo, everything's great, right?
It was a lot of pressure. I mean, and that is 100% where I put my focus for those first years. And I was working with China, right? And it was, the whole focus was about getting a quality product out of China. So we had a very strict protocol for checking. An order came in from a customer. I got it. I sent it to my supplier. The supplier sent it to the factory. The factory had to take a photo, which came back to my supplier, to me, to the ultimate customer saying, is this what you ordered? Are you going to sign off on this? Nothing got run at a factory that a customer didn't okay the prototype, right? So we prototyped everything, and that took a lot of time, but that was our quality control, and that was super, super important. I worked really hard. It took us a year, or really almost 2 years, to lock down a system to make sure we were getting a consistent color. Because if you say, okay, it's a navy blue bag, well, there's a range of navy blue, right? There's lighter and darker. And we had to lock down, this is what navy blue is, and this is what green is. And there were, we carried maybe 20 colors or 25 colors, but every time it came in, it was exactly the same color because we locked down those color formulas. So quality control, and I went to my supplier and I always said to her in China, I said, whatever is bad for you is bad for me. I want you to be paying your workers fairly because quality is number one. So your people have to have enough to give me the kind of quality that I need to deliver. Because David, you're exactly right. If I deliver a bunch of garbage to my client and they say, sorry, we're not taking this, that's a huge hit. That's a huge hit. We can't do that, right? We had to run a tight ship. Grocery bags are one of those things. You just make a few pennies per bag is the profit, right? So there's not a lot of margin for error. We really locked down quality control, and I worked very hard. And I was the moral thing, I started it from a moral center, and I really wanted to make sure that I was doing the right thing by the people in China too. And I had monitoring, and had really good monitoring by Verite. And they would interview the workers in China and in the factory, but they would also talk to them on their way home, away from the factory, when they were more likely to divulge any abuses. And I found out at first that they were not being paid properly. They weren't being paid overtime. They weren't always getting paid for what they did. So I worked with them, and the factory owners, they're entrepreneurs too. They're just trying to figure things out on their own. So we had to hold them to account. And I paid for accounting services to go in there and teach them how to do correct books and pay their workers fairly. And that worked really well for them. But at one point, so I did, and that was a couple of years. And then I was going to get like a great, a report that just showed that they were being paid fairly. The safety measures were there. It was clean and safe in that factory. And I got the report and it said there was an underage worker. And I was horrified because, child labor was a no tolerance policy for me, right? Category. And I call my supplier and she goes, well, yeah, we do have a worker. She's a little bit young, but she's with her sister and her mom. They just came out of the countryside and she has her sister's face. And I was like, that made no sense to me. She has her sister's face. What are you talking about? And I called the person who was at Verite who did the report. And she said, yeah, here's what happened. This family came out of the countryside. The legal age for finishing school is 16, but the legal age to work is 17. So there's this little gap here. And this is a mom who came out of the country. I keep saying that because she was probably, there was a one-child rule there in China. And a woman with 2 daughters was not producing an heir. And she probably had the second child trying to produce a male heir. And she was probably not treated very well. And sometimes there was a second wife or a third wife until somebody does produce an heir. And the one who's not producing heirs or boys is not treated very well. And she left as soon as that second daughter was finished with school. And she was bringing her daughters to the city. They wouldn't have to rely on a rural lord's graces for their living anymore. She was teaching her daughters skills and bringing them up into the middle class, because those are middle class jobs. And they would be able to make their own living, those girls. But they were sharing one set of papers because you could only get one set of papers per mom. So if there were 2 kids, they were sharing. And that's why she kept saying she has her sister's face. And the factory offered to fire her and give me the report that I wanted. And I was like, you can't fire her. What is she gonna do? She's not gonna sit home. Like, she has to work. And what is the mom gonna do with the 16-year-old? And she has to go to work. Like, how is that gonna work? And this was really the hardest decision I ever made in business in my life, because I put a lot of money trying to get a clean report. And it seemed to me too cruel to fire her. She didn't exist legally for no fault of her own. And she didn't deserve to be fired. It's not her fault. So we found out when her birthday was, and I said, all right, I'm going to get a report the next day after her birthday. And it felt to me like it was better for me to take that hit and pay for another report, because the quality comes, this gets back to what you were talking about, quality. It comes from treating people with respect and treating people right and paying them right. And I was always insistent, we treat everybody along that supply chain. We treat them right and we treat them with respect, and they have a right to their minimum wage. And I was really, really worked hard to deliver on my promise for my supply chain. And I all those times when I was producing, selling 8 million bags a year, it's not about me. It's about all those workers. I was feeding a lot of families in China. I was feeding a lot of families in America. We had truckers, we had warehouse people, we had people in my office. This was a machine that was driving the economy, right? I was doing my part for the economy. And I got my little piece of the pie, and that was fine. And I was happy to do that. And I did do well. I did. I told Gary when I started, I hoped to double my teacher's salary. And actually, by the end of it, I had tripled my teacher's salary.
Good for
I wasn't
you.
making millions.
No, but you made more money doing what's right and helping the world. So that's, I mean, can't ask for much more than that, right?
I did right by my family. I did right by the world. Yeah.
That's awesome. Now, so let's do this. Between your birth and between where you are today, is there anything we've missed that you want to cover? Any key points, any messages, any kind of encouragement for our audience between there and today, before we get into today to where you're heading in the future?
I think that's it. I think we got it. Being guided by your heart, listening to yourself, believing in yourself, tell your own story and take control of your story. I think we've really hit it.
Awesome. Then let's talk about where's Lisa today? Where are you today and where are you heading? How can we help you get there?
Well, over the winter of COVID, I hunkered down and I told my story formally, and I've written a book and it's being published. So my book comes out. It's called Bag Lady. That's the title. And the subtitle is How I Started a Business for a Greener World and Changed the Way America Shops. It's coming out on April 22nd. And writing my story, again, it was just a really great way of owning the arc of my own story and looking where I was. And I tell some stories, a lot of stuff about business in there and my business mistakes, and I made a lot of them. And I'm just as honest about my mistakes because that's how I learn, right? Some people think that if you admit a mistake, you're weak. But actually, when you're admitting a mistake, you're actually stronger. When you say, okay, I made that mistake and now I'm learning, right? That's a strength. So I tell my story, I tell my business mistakes, what I did right, what I did wrong. And I'm really excited to have this come out into the world. When I sold my business, I sold my business in 2017. I just felt like I was done, like I had done what I needed to do. And I launched as a business coach, and I really lean into emotional intelligence, which is really a fancy way of being people-centered, driven by purpose, driven by your heart. And I think that was really the secret to what drove me to success, was that I always looked inward to my heart. Is this the right thing to do? Being driven by my heart and being driven by my purpose of reducing waste. And those things really guided me. So I tell my story, and yeah, take a look at my story. It should be on preview by the time this comes out. I don't know. It should be on preview pre-order on Amazon by March 1st. It's not even on Amazon yet. This is all really new, but it's coming out for Earth Day. So we got it on the fast track, and I'm really excited to share it for people who are concerned about the earth, learn about, bags, and learn what I did in business. And if you want to be the kind of person if you want some inspiration for how you can make a difference in your world and start a business to make your world better, my book helps you find a blueprint for how to think like that, how to move forward, how to believe in yourself and believe in your mission, and write a mission statement and stay true to it. And yeah, we can all change the world.
Awesome. Well, I'm looking forward to getting a copy myself and reading it. I'm excited. The Bag Lady, or Bag Lady, or The Bag Lady?
Bag Lady. There's no that. It's just called Bag Lady.
Bag Lady. And then we'll probably release this episode before then, but we'll also put a link in the show notes. So when it comes out, we'll put that Amazon link in there. So if you're listening to this 2 years from now, just check out the show notes as always. Click on the link. You got it. Well, Lisa, it's been a true honor and pleasure. You truly are a remarkable woman. Is there anything else we haven't covered that you want to cover today? Any last thoughts for our listeners you want to leave with them?
I think we've covered, most of everything I've learned. There's so many good lessons in my book, but I'm so thankful, David, that, you've taken the time today to listen to those little moments in my life that have put me on the right path, and just listening to myself and listening to you. And I'm just want to connect with, people like you who see the pathway and, understand that we're all individuals. We have to believe in ourselves and go from there. So lift other people up, lift everybody up.
Yeah, and I mean it. I mean it totally sincerely. After this conversation, next time at the store, I'm gonna go, or actually, maybe that's a suggestion. I'm gonna go buy reusable bags. Boom, done. Easy way I can help. Are all bags created equal? Do you have a website still where I know you said you sold your company, but where should I be looking? Because one of my things is I don't want to pay, even if it's $1 or $2, I don't want to buy it and the bag falls apart. So I'm buying a piece of trash that goes in the trash, right? Where's a good
I
place to
agree.
buy a good bag?
I agree. So my company was called One Bag at a Time, and the guy who bought my company still sells bags to Ace Hardware and True Value Hardware. So you can get a one bag at a time bag that I've had people call me or write me after 6 or 8 years saying my 99-cent bag after 6 or 8 years has finally fallen apart and I'm going to go get another one. So a really quality bag, go to Ace or go to True Value. Those are nationwide. He's got the co-op. He also does a lot of co-op. So go to your local co-op and find one bag at a time bags. They're really great quality for $1. It's a really nice bag. And we really do care about the quality and work to make it work for our ultimate customer, which is people like you and people like your listeners, and go out and get a couple of bags and you'll see, interesting, you said you use all those bags for all this trash. The bags are the trash, right? If you start to think about the packaging and just reduce your packaging, you could probably, without trying very hard, reduce your trash by half. You want the stuff inside the packaging. Just leave the packaging. You don't need the bag. The bag is just trash, right? So if you think of it that way, get what you want. Don't get the packaging that you don't want. And you'll find that there's just less to throw away, and that's a cleaner world for everybody.
Yeah, and it all really legitimately does add up. I mean, a couple bags here, a couple bags there. It's like money. You don't look at your bank account or your checking and see like all these huge purchases that drained it. I mean, it's not huge purchases, it's just everyday little things. It's all the times you're eating out. All that little stuff adds up. So likewise, bags, boom, there we go. We just one little change in our life, not a big deal, but it can make a big impact. So thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate your time. I look forward to continuing the relationship. And your husband's a whole other story, but I had no idea your husband had those blockbuster movies under his belt. That's crazy exciting because
and he's got a new one coming out called Finest Kind. One word, Finest Kind. So look for that next fall. That's his new one. It's an amazing, amazing story. So it's not, but it's inspired by, it's written by Brian Helgeland, who's an Oscar-winning writer. He wrote LA Confidential and Mystic River and a bunch, 42, a bunch of great, amazing. And this really is inspired by his own life coming out of a fishing community in New Bedford, scallop fishing community, and becoming the first in his, he was the first person in his family to go to college. And he's become an amazing writer, but this movie really pays homage to the life of the people who work hard and bring us our food every day out of the ocean and onto our plates. And it's a crime thriller. There's a lot of excitement going on, but at the heart of it is the relationship between a father and a son. And I get teary thinking about the story. It's a pretty amazing story. So Finest Kind, look for that on your screen. Next, should be out November, December. And he's still out there making great films. I just, have so much appreciation for him and his support for me. And he's always been rock solid for me. So
that's fantastic. I'm so happy for you. And I'm thankful that you shared your time with us today. So for our community, if you want to reach out to Lisa, check out the show notes. We put her contact info in there. If you want to get a high quality reusable bag, one bag at a time, Ace Value or True Value in North America, great places to go. But other than that, thank you again, Lisa, for being on the show. If you need anything, please reach out to us as a community. But for our community members, call Lisa, contact her, keep the dialogue going, and let's just do what we can to be just stewards of the world God gave us. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
All right. Have a great day. And to our listeners, remember, our slogan is listen, do, repeat for life. So don't just listen to this great information Lisa gave you. Do it, repeat it each day so you can have a great life in this world and eternity to come. I'm Dave Pasqualone. This is the Remarkable People Podcast. Thanks and see you next week. Ciao.